Right now, the Chicago Bears have built the single most dangerous pass-catching room in NFL history, or the most expensive ticking time bomb in football. You're looking at Luther Burden III, Rome Odunze, and Colston Loveland. On paper, Ben Johnson has an unstoppable offense. But behind closed doors, there is only one football, 3 WR, one egos, and a top-tier tight end demanding targets. If Caleb Williams doesn't feed everyone, this locker room won't just bend, it will implode. Here is how Chicago's biggest strength could tear them apart from the inside out. To understand why this situation is so volatile, you have to look at the sheer caliber of talent packed inside Hallas Hall. When you turn on the tape, what you see is nothing short of breathtaking. You see Luther Burden III snapping off route breaks with terrifying suddenness, leaving defensive backs grasping at air before exploding into open space with world-class run-after-catch ability. You see Rome Odunze high-pointing boundary fades with effortless athletic grace, leveraging his massive frame to turn 50-50 balls into guaranteed Chicago possessions. Then you add Colston Loveland into the mix, a 6'6" tight end who moves like a slot receiver, flexed out in space and completely overwhelming linebackers and safeties on vertical seam routes. Visually, it looks like a video game play creator brought to life. Every single time Caleb Williams drops back to pass, he is looking at three separate elite options who are capable of taking any given snap straight to the house. For defensive coordinators across the league, preparing for this group is a genuine nightmare. How do you scheme against a personnel package where there is simply no weak link to exploit? Double team Odunze on the outside, and you leave Burden isolated in space against a nickel corner who cannot match his lateral quickness. Roll coverage down to contain Burden's yards after catch threat, and Loveland immediately gouges you down the middle of the field for 30 yards. Try to play straight coverages across the board, and Caleb Williams will slice you to pieces with surgical precision. On paper, it's a nightmare for defenses. In the locker room, it's a ticking time bomb. Because football is not played in a vacuum, and NFL stars are not computer-generated avatars. Wide receivers, by their very nature, are alpha competitors wired to believe that every single pass play should flow through them. They thrive on rhythm, feed on targets, and build their careers, brand equity, and multi-million-dollar contracts on statistical production. When a player of Rome Odunze's stature runs 5 consecutive flawless routes, creates 3 yards of separation on every play, and never sees a target because Caleb Williams is locked onto Burden or Loveland, frustration is not just possible, it is inevitable. Think about the math behind an average NFL game. A high-powered up-tempo passing attack might drop back to pass 40 times in a game. After accounting for sacks, throwaways, checkdowns to running backs, and scrambled plays, a quarterback might complete 25 to 28 passes. In a traditional offense, your primary wide receiver demands 10 to 12 targets per game to stay satisfied and productive. But in this Chicago offense, you have 3 separate players who all possess the talent, draft capital, and ambition of a true focal point. Divide those 40 dropbacks among 3 elite wideouts and a generational tight end talent, and suddenly someone is getting left out in the cold. When the Bears win, these underlying tensions are easy to sweep under the rug. High fives on the sideline and team celebrations can mask a lot of unfulfilled expectations. But the moment Chicago faces adversity, the moment they drop a tough divisional matchup or go 3 straight drives without a first down, the cracks in the foundation begin to show. Body language changes on the sideline. Hands go up in the air after incomplete passes. Whispers begin in post-game press conferences about offensive rhythm and target distribution. Ben Johnson's offensive mastermind reputation will be put to the ultimate human test, because drawing up explosive route concepts on a whiteboard is easy, but managing 4 elite competitive egos who all expect the ball in crunch time, is one of the hardest challenges in modern sports management. To understand how this hierarchy began to fracture, you have to examine the explosive, undeniable arrival of Luther Burden III. When Chicago invested heavy draft capital into the Missouri standout, the national consensus was that he would serve as a complementary piece, a dynamic slot weapon who could gradually learn the nuances of modern NFL route running while veteran receivers drew primary double teams. Instead, Burden forced his way into the center of the universe. From his very first real snaps, he did not just look like a rookie settling into an offense. He looked like a cheat code that Ben Johnson was practically forced to exploit. When you break down the game tape, Burden's impact is defined by an elite, almost violent post-catch acceleration. Plenty of wide receivers in today's league possess raw straight-line speed, but Burden possesses rare contact balance combined with fluid, lateral agility that turns standard 5-yard hitch routes into 60-yard house calls. On film, you watch him catch a quick slant in tight quarters, absorb a direct hit from an incoming safety, spin off the contact without dropping his center of gravity, and accelerate upfield before the defensive backfield can even adjust their pursuit angles. He doesn't just catch passes, he attacks space. He operates with the instincts of a running back trapped in an elite wide receiver's body, forcing missed tackles at a rate usually reserved for premier tailbacks. In Ben Johnson's system, that specific skill set is pure gold. Johnson's play-calling identity thrives on setting up easy, high-percentage throws that allow playmakers to create magic after the catch. It didn't take long for Caleb Williams to recognize this dynamic. Why throw into a tight vertical window down the boundary when you can snap off a quick screen or a crossing route to Burden out of the slot and watch him turn a simple checkdown into an explosive gain? Week after week, the tape showed the same story. Whenever the Bears needed an instant spark or a conversion on third and medium, the ball invariably found its way into Burden's hands. His targets surged, his yardage numbers spiked, and his confidence exploded. However, that meteoric takeover created a massive structural shift across the rest of the receiving corps. In professional sports, target hierarchy is rarely surrendered willingly. Established veterans and former top 10 picks like Rome Odunze were brought to Chicago with the explicit expectation of being the primary engine of this passing attack. When a young player like Burden suddenly absorbs a lion's share of the high-value target volume, it fundamentally reshapes the dynamics inside the building. A receiver's value is dictated by touch distribution. Every time Burden demands a design touch, a jet sweep, or a primary target on a third down concept, that is one fewer opportunity for another star on the field to prove their worth. Burden's ascension pushed the narrative from a balanced multi-weapon offense toward a clear alpha-driven structure. He wasn't just accepting a situational slot role anymore. His production dictated that he should be treated as the focal point of the entire game plan. He began demanding the ball in key moments, celebrating with an intensity that signaled he knew he was the best playmaker on the field and expecting the offense to run through his unique talent. For Caleb Williams, relying on Burden became second nature because the reward was immediate and undeniable. But in an NFL locker room, when a young star takes over the alpha spotlight this rapidly, it creates a subtle underlying friction. The established order of the wide receiver room had been completely upended, and the rest of the room was left to adapt to living in the shadow of Luther Burden's meteoric rise. If Luther Burden's arrival shifted the hierarchy outside, Ben Johnson's obsession with tight ends threw the entire receiver room into a structural crisis. To truly grasp the tactical genius and the internal friction of Ben Johnson's offensive design, you have to look beyond traditional three wide receiver formations and dive deep into the world of multi-tight end packages. Johnson did not ascend to premier play caller status by simply throwing deep fades to outside wideouts. He built his reputation by weaponizing 12 and 13 personnel, using multiple versatile tight ends to create maddening geometric conflicts for opposing defensive coordinators. When Chicago selected Colston Loveland high in the first round to pair alongside established starter Cole Kmet, Johnson wasn't just adding depth, he was unveiling the core blueprint of his Chicago Revolution. Animated route trees from film breakdowns reveal the underlying magic of this system. In 12 personnel, one running back, two tight ends, and two wide receivers, Johnson creates pre-snap illusions that trap defenses in impossible personnel decisions. If a defense matches heavy multi-tight end sets with base linebacker packages, Loveland flexes out into the slot or out wide, isolating a clunky linebacker or safety in space on vertical seam routes and option looks. If a defense responds by subbing in lighter nickel or dime cornerbacks, Kmet and Loveland attach to the line of scrimmage, sealing edges in the running game and pounding the defensive front into submission. It is a constant, shifting shell game that forces linebackers to cover like corners and cornerbacks to tackle like linebackers. The problem for Chicago's star wide receivers, however, is purely mathematical. In a traditional 11 personnel offense, 3 wide receivers are on the field for roughly 80 to 90% of offensive snaps. But under Johnson's heavy 12 personnel revolution, the third wide receiver is frequently pulled off the field entirely in favor of Loveland's game-breaking flexibility. That means fewer snaps, fewer route distributions, and significantly fewer target opportunities for elite wideouts who expect to be on the gridiron for every single critical series. Where this dynamic transforms into genuine locker room tension is inside the red zone. The scoring territory inside the 20-yard line is where receivers earn their legendary reputations, construct their statistical resumes, and secure their lucrative postseason incentives. When a drive reaches the high-rent district of the field, every star wideout wants the red zone target, the high-pointing corner fade or the quick slant designed to cap off a scoring drive with 6 points. But Ben Johnson's playbook inside the red zone turns heavy tight end usage into an absolute cheat code. Colston Loveland operates as the ultimate red zone mismatch engine. At 6'6", with the sudden lateral quickness of a basketball guard, Loveland dominates the high danger zone over the middle. Whether it's play action misdirection, delayed leak concepts, or isolation fades in the back of the end zone, Caleb Williams' eyes naturally wander toward his tight ends in tight spaces. Loveland and Kmet gobble up high-value targets at an astonishing rate because their frames provide massive catch radiuses that minimize interception risk in crowded goal line windows. Imagine running a flawless route from the outside position on 3rd and goal from the 7-yard line, completely turning your corner around, only to watch Caleb Williams snap a quick ball over the middle to Loveland for a walk-in touchdown. The play succeeds, the scoreboard changes, and the stadium erupts in celebration. But as the team walks off the field, a subtle resentment festers. Wide receivers know that touchdown statistics dictate national narratives, media coverage, and future contract negotiations. Every time a tight end steals a designed touchdown pass in the red zone, the target priority hierarchy becomes a sore subject. Ben Johnson may view 12 personnel as the ultimate tactical revolution, a scheme that systematically dismantles defensive fronts through personnel disguise. But inside the receiver meeting rooms, it represents a slow, systemic erosion of wide receiver target share. As Colston Loveland continues his rapid emergence into a dominant pass-catching force, the margin for error for Chicago's wide receivers becomes razor-thin, turning every single red zone possession into a quiet battle over who actually gets fed in the moments that matter most. While schematics and personnel groupings dictate how plays look on paper, The true test of an NFL offense takes place inside the human psychology of the huddle. Managing elite athletic talent is never just about drawing up open routes. It is about navigating individual egos, emotional rhythms, and the unyielding pressure placed on a young franchise quarterback. At the center of this storm sits Caleb Williams, tasked not only with executing complex reads at game speed, but also with maintaining harmony among a group of superstar pass catchers who all believe they should be his first read on every single dropback. Analyzing Williams' target tendencies in high-pressure scenarios reveals a fascinating window into quarterback psychology. Under heavy pass rush or in third and long situations, every quarterback defaults to their comfort zone, the player they trust implicitly to make a play when structure breaks down. For Williams, that target distribution shifts depending on the flow of the game, creating an unpredictable landscape for his receivers. When a play breaks down and Williams scrambles outside the pocket, his eyes naturally look for the player who uncovers fastest or presents the largest physical target. If that comfort read consistently becomes Luther Burden in the slot or Colston Loveland on a broken seam route, the outside receivers are left running clear out routes into empty space, expending maximum physical energy for zero statistical reward. The visual evidence on the tape becomes undeniable when you examine sideline body language during games where target distribution becomes lopsided. NFL broadcasts often capture subtle interactions that reveal deep-seated frustration long before a player speaks into a microphone. You see a star wideout trot back to the bench after running a perfect double move down the sideline where he was wide open, only to see the ball dumped off to a tight end over the middle. The receiver doesn't throw a helmet or start a screaming match. Instead, it is the quiet, detached body language that speaks volumes. The slow walk to the bench, the unstrapping of the gloves, the cold distance between the player and the quarterback as they review photos on the blue tablet. Consider what happens when a player of Rome Odunze's caliber goes 2 full quarters without a single official target in a close game. For an elite receiver, silence on the stat sheet feels like isolation. They know that every route run is captured on high-definition film, evaluated by national media and analyzed by fans across the country. In a losing effort, that silence transforms into an active grievance. The narrative shifts from team execution to personal misuse. Why is an elite talent being used as a decoy while the offense struggles to sustain drives? Why is the rookie quarterback ignoring open boundary routes in favor of contested throws into traffic over the middle? This is where the fine line between team success and individual stardom becomes razor-thin. In press conferences, players will dutifully recite standard corporate answers about prioritizing team wins above personal statistics. But behind closed doors, every player's inner circle, agent, and personal brand strategist is reinforcing a very different reality. Production equals leverage, and leverage equals survival in the NFL. When target charts show an uneven spread over a 3-game stretch, subtle comments begin to leak into media soundbites. A receiver might casually remark that they can only control running their route, or that they were open on plays where the ball went elsewhere. Caleb Williams faces an impossible balancing act. If he attempts to force-feed targets to an unhappy receiver simply to keep the peace in the locker room, he risks making predetermined reads, throwing into double coverage, and committing fatal turnovers. If he ignores the discontent and strictly follows his progression, he risks losing the trust and effort of key playmakers who feel neglected. A receiver who feels systematically underutilized may subtly lose that half-step of explosive effort when running a backside decoy route, ultimately weakening the entire offensive structure. Managing these egos requires continuous communication, transparent leadership, and an acute awareness of human emotion from both Williams and head coach Ben Johnson, because a locker room divided by target share is a locker room that cannot survive when real adversity hits. The ultimate fate of this Chicago Bears offensive construct hinges on a single question. Can Ben Johnson orchestrate a Super Bowl symphony, or will these competing forces collapse into unmitigated locker room chaos? When you look at the raw talent assembled on this roster, the upside is almost overwhelming. On game days, when the execution is crisp and the ball flows seamlessly from player to player, you see a glimpses of an all-time offensive juggernaut. Quick-cut montages of touchdowns tell the story of what this group looks like at its absolute peak. Luther Burden breaking a tackle on a quick slant and racing down the sideline, Colston Loveland leaping over a linebacker in the back of the end zone, and Rome Odunze dragging a toe along the boundary on a critical third down conversion. When everyone is touch satisfied and the scoreboard is rolling, Chicago looks completely unstoppable. Yet right alongside those celebratory high-five montages sits the quiet, haunting reality captured in the hallway shots outside the locker room after a loss. In modern professional football, chemical alignment is just as vital as physical execution. Managing elite pass catchers requires a masterclass in human psychology, ego distribution, and communication. Ben Johnson was brought to Chicago not simply because he can manipulate light boxes and draw up multi-tight end route concepts, but because he is tasked with building a sustainable culture where superstar individual ambitions align with a collective goal. History in the NFL is littered with dream offenses that possessed unlimited skill position talent on paper, only to self-destruct from the inside out because target hierarchy was never clearly established. When wide receivers feel their statistical equity, market value, and professional identities are being systematically compromised by play-calling choices, subtle fractures turn into wide chasms. It takes only a few passive-aggressive press conference comments, a missed block on a perimeter screen, or a tense sideline conversation with a young quarterback for the foundation of a locker room to erode. If Caleb Williams is forced to spend his Sundays managing individual feelings rather than reading coverage structures, the speed and decisiveness that make him a special quarterback will inevitably decline. However, if Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams can master this delicate balance, the reward is nothing short of a Lombardi trophy. The true strength of having Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, and a deep receiving core simultaneously on the field is that no single defensive scheme in football can neutralize them all. When a play caller convinces star athletes to embrace the concept of sacrificial decoy routes, knowing that drawing safety help today guarantees an isolated one-on-one matchup tomorrow, an offense becomes truly invincible. Success in this environment requires complete transparency from the coaching staff and unwavering, unselfish trust among the players. As Chicago enters this defining era, every single snap will be passed under an intense national magnifying glass. Every target distribution chart will be scrutinized by analysts. Every sideline interaction will be dissected by body language experts, and every post-game quote will be tested for hidden subtext. Will this star-studded pass-catching unit be remembered as the legendary engine that brought a championship back to Soldier Field, or as a cautionary tale of too many stars suffocating one football field? Ben Johnson holds the baton. Caleb Williams holds the ball. And the entire league is waiting to see whether this offense produces a masterwork of offensive music or a devastating explosion that tears Chicago's locker room apart.